Okay, time to bring it home with the storm moulding around the back edges. So we're just going to use a piece of 31 by 11 DAR or dressed all round, some finger jointed pine across the back edge. So hopefully you've got this transition in a nice straight line. Just nail it in. Make sure you cut these bottom edges at the angle. Don't just knock them off square and shove them in. So whatever the angle of the roof is, cut the edge of your moulding to match. If you like, you can even set the nose of the gun out just to leave the nails showing a little bit. It'll make it a little bit easier to pull the job out when it's time to do the cleaning up. There we go, nice and flush past our transition, flush with the edge of our cladding. There is another view shot there. When we go across our join strips, we're going to take a little scallop out so that our moulding sits nice and flat to the soffit sheet. So just mark both sides, bring it down and mark across the back, and then with a nice sharp chisel just take a little bit of a scallop out of that so that it looks a little bit like that. And when it goes up, it'll sit nice and flat. I actually use the rounded nose end of my belt sander to take a little scallop out of them. It does quite a good job. And when it nails in, it will just go over that plastic strip without pushing out big gaps. Where your mouldings have to be joined, Eaves is the one place where you can get away with butt joins. Everywhere else, skirtings and architraves, you've got to mitre join them. For Eaves, Barry butt joint is just fine to do the job. And where we go around internal corners, there's a butt joint on the internals. And here we are, there's moulding coming across, butted into both ends, cut nice and neatly. And this little drip line is what is left from where we hung that transition past 25mm. It just leaves us with a nice little neat drip line to run a moulding in along the edge of. We have a cavity closer here we've got to get around that we're going to end up with an external corner. So of course externals we have to mitre, we can't butt them. So I just put a piece of timber at one side, run my pencil along. That gives me a mark this way. Put it up at the other side, run a pencil along. I now have two marks that I can measure to. I'll just measure both sides, cut two pieces, and I like to put these two short bits in first, just because you don't have a lot of distance. If you run the long piece in first, then you've really got a tiny, tiny piece you're trying to deal with. I like to put these ones in first and then bring the other ones into the edge of them. So there's the bottom edge, there's our little mitered bit in around the corner with our piece along the edge of our transition. Again, our transition finishes flush with our brickwork so that we can just run a moulding straight past. This bottom end is cut to the angle that it has to be to meet the fascia nice and neatly. And that just leaves the mitre coming around the corner under the raking eaves. Now this is a compound mitre, it's not a true 45. So I like to just to grab two little offcuts and I'll throw a angled cut on them and just try them in place so I can check exactly what angle I need to set my drop saw to cut that. So test it on a couple of offcuts and like before run a pencil line around them so that you've got something to measure to when you put your final piece in. Throw them in, make sure they line up right on the corner of your cladding. If they don't quite fit right, we just grab a hand plane, give it a bit of a trim and throw it in, and we should end up with a nice neat mitre that lines up with the corner of the cladding. Now we've just got to cover that join over. For this one you can, if you like, use a plastic joiner strip. I'm just not a big fan of it because it's not a flat join. You're trying to put a flat joiner around a slightly apexed join. So you can squeeze it in. I'm just not a big fan of it. I much prefer to put a couple of timber strips in a situation like this. So again, compound mitre on the bottom end, compound mitre on the top, mark it nice and neatly and fit them in and get them to line up with the mitres on the storm moulding that go around the back edge there. And you'll end up with something like this. A couple of pieces there and there. And that is our completed job. We've got the framing, sheeting and mouldings around the raked section, around the box section to the brickwork, the box section to the timber cladding, and the sloping soffit going up the barge end as well. Hopefully that helps you with your practical work. Make sure that you remove your work neatly so that the fibro and the mouldings can be reused. Thank you and good luck.